What if the one secret you spent years burying was the only thing that could save a stranger's fortune? In the heart of New York City, inside one of its most exclusive restaurants, a deal worth billions of dollars is about to collapse. The reason? A single untranslatable phrase. The room is suffocating with tension as a notoriously impatient millionaire, Mr. Rossi, prepares to walk away, his fortune hanging in the balance. His team of high-paid experts is useless, but they've all overlooked one person: the quiet waitress clearing their plates. She's been invisible all night, but she understands every word, because the language they're struggling with isn't just a language to her, it's the sound of her own private prison, a past she risked everything to escape. Now she faces an impossible choice: stay silent and safe, or speak and risk reigniting the nightmares she thought she'd left behind forever. The Gilded Scepter wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater of power, and Catherine Miller was one of its many stagehands trained to be invisible. Her uniform, a crisp black dress with a starched white apron, was a costume of anonymity. For 2 years, this invisibility had been her sanctuary. She moved through the opulent dining room with an economy of motion that belied the frantic calculus in her mind. Table 7 needs water. The couple at table 12 is ready for the check, and the formidable party in the private Versailles suite is on its 3rd bottle of Barolo, a wine whose name alone sent a phantom ache through her jaw. Tonight, the tension emanating from the Versailles suite was a palpable force, a low-frequency hum of disaster that seeped under the heavy oak doors and into the main dining room. The guest of honor was Valeriano Rossi, a titan of the textile industry, a man whose empire was woven from tradition, ruthlessness, and an unyielding adherence to the old ways. He was a relic from another era, with a face like a Roman bust and eyes that missed nothing. His presence had sent the restaurant's manager, David Finch, into a state of barely concealed panic since the reservation was made. Catherine's job was to support the lead server for the suite, which meant she was the one fetching the extra bread, refilling the water glasses, and clearing plates with the silent grace of a ghost. Each time she entered the room, the pressure intensified. Mr. Rossi sat at the head of the long, polished mahogany table, flanked by 2 younger, impeccably dressed men who Catherine guessed were his sons or nephews. They had the same sharp nose and dismissive posture. Opposite them were 3 American executives from a major fashion conglomerate, their faces a mixture of avarice and anxiety. Between them sat a flustered man in his late 20s named Peterson, the hired translator whose sweat was beginning to stain the collar of his expensive shirt. The deal, as Catherine had pieced together from snippets of overheard conversation, was monumental. Rossi's family-owned mills, the last of their kind, produced a fabric of unparalleled quality. The American conglomerate wanted exclusive rights, a deal that would secure Rossi's legacy and inject modern capital into his aging enterprise. But the negotiation had hit a wall. A thick, immovable wall of language and culture. No, Rossi's voice, a gravelly baritone, cut through the room. He spoke in his native tongue, his words rapid and sharp. Catherine, standing by the service trolley, felt her shoulders tense. She understood him perfectly. Every syllable was a ghost from a life she had meticulously buried. "You are not listening to the soul of the words. You give me the shell." "The empty shell," Peterson, the translator, stammered. "Mr. Rossi, I assure you, the literal translation of guardian of the loom is literal." Rossi slammed his palm on the table, making the crystal water glasses tremble. "We are not discussing plumbing fixtures. This is about heritage, about the hands of my grandfather and his father before him. It is about the blood pact between my family and the craft. How do you translate that blood agreement?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound, devoid of humor. "You make us sound like gangsters." The American executives shifted uncomfortably. The lead executive, a man named Richard Sterling, offered a tight, placating smile. "Mr. Rossi, we have the utmost respect for your family's history. Perhaps if we focus on the numbers, the distribution channels." Rossi waved a dismissive hand, cutting him off, and switching to heavily accented but clear English. Numbers are for accountants. I am talking about trust. You want my name, my family's soul, stitched into your mass-produced garments. You must understand what you are buying. He then turned back to his own men and unleashed a torrent of frustrated dialect, a specific regional variation that was far from the standardized language taught in schools. Catherine felt a chill crawl up her spine. It was the dialect of her ex-husband, Vincent. The language of her gilded cage. The words spoken over Sunday dinners that felt more like inquests, the whispered arguments in the dead of night, the praises and condemnations that had shaped and nearly broken her. For 5 years, she had been immersed in it, forced to learn its every nuance, every subtle threat and coded promise. Fluency had been a condition of her marriage, a tool for survival, in a family that saw her as an outsider, an American girl who would never truly belong. She could see Peterson's predicament clearly. The phrase Rossi was stuck on, the trust of the thread, in a literal sense. It was a deeply idiomatic expression, evoking a sacred, almost spiritual responsibility passed down through generations. It meant that every thread carried the integrity of the man who wove it. To translate it literally was to render it meaningless, even ridiculous. Mr. Peterson Rossi said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low level. Tell them this. If a man does not understand that the thread has a memory, he cannot be trusted with the loom. Tell them that. Peterson swallowed hard. The thread has a memory, sir. He looked utterly lost. Rossi threw his hands up in disgust. Basta. Enough. This is a waste of my time. He pushed his chair back the legs, scraping harshly against the parquet floor. The sound was like a death knell for the deal. His 2 younger associates immediately began to gather their papers, their faces grim. Richard Sterling, the American executive, stood up, his face paling. Mr. Rossi, please. Let's not be hasty. We can find another interpreter. We can reschedule. There is nothing to reschedule, Rossi snarled in English. You do not understand. And if you do not understand the foundation, the house will collapse. The deal is off. Panic flared in David Finch's eyes as he stood hovering near the doorway. He saw a $10,000 dinner, a potential long-term patron, and his own reputation all circling the drain. He wrung his hands, his face a mask of helpless despair. Catherine stood frozen by her cart, a stack of porcelain plates in her hands. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was her life now. Quiet, anonymous, safe. She earned her check, paid her rent for the tiny apartment that was hers and hers alone, and worked toward her online degree in library sciences, the quietest profession she could imagine. Speaking that language, revealing her knowledge, would be like opening a locked door and inviting the ghosts of her past to come streaming through. Vincent's family was powerful with connections that ran deep throughout the city. If they knew where she was, what she was doing. But then she looked at Rossi's face. She saw past the anger and the arrogance. In his eyes, she saw a profound, weary frustration, the frustration of a man trying to protect the last vestiges of a dying world, a world of craftsmanship and honor from a world of spreadsheets and profit margins. It was a world she had once hated, but whose language she knew as well as her own. Rossi was halfway to the door. The deal, worth more money than Catherine could ever conceive of, was 99% dead. Her manager was about to have a heart attack. The Americans looked defeated. Her training, her instincts, her carefully constructed new life screamed at her to stay quiet, to clear the plates and fade into the background. But something else, a flicker of defiance she thought had been extinguished long ago, stirred within her. For 5 years, that language had been used to control her, to diminish her, to remind her of her place. What if for once she could use it to build something? As Rossi passed her, his expensive cologne washing over her, a single sentence, quiet but clear, slipped from her lips. She spoke not in the formal textbook language of the failed translator, but in the rich, nuanced dialect of Rossi's own region. The world in the Versailles suite stopped. Rossi froze his hand on the doorknob. The American executive stared confused. David Finch's jaw dropped. Rossi turned around slowly, his eyes like chips of obsidian locking onto hers. He scanned her simple black uniform, her plain face, the stack of plates she was still holding. Disbelief, then shock, then a dawning, dangerous curiosity flickered across his features. What he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to shake the very air. "Did you just say?" Catherine met his gaze, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The silence she had spoken of had just ended, and she knew with terrifying certainty that her life would never be quiet again. The silence that followed Catherine's words was heavier and more profound than any she had ever experienced. It was an absolute void sucking the air from the room. Every eye was fixed on her, the waitress, the non-entity, the woman who was paid to be a piece of the furniture. In that moment, she was the center of a universe she had never asked to enter. The plates in her hands suddenly felt immensely heavy, the last anchor to the simple reality she had inhabited just seconds before. Mr. Rossi took a slow, deliberate step back into the room. His posture had changed. The explosive frustration was gone, replaced by an unnerving stillness, the coiled calm of a predator that has just caught an unexpected and fascinating scent. He completely ignored the powerful executives and the terrified manager, his entire focus converging on Catherine. "I will ask you again," he said, his voice low and devoid of its earlier anger. He spoke in English as if testing her, wanting the others to understand the question. "What did you say?" Catherine's throat was dry. She could feel David Finch's horrified gaze boring into her, silently screaming at her for breaking the cardinal rule, never engage the guests. But she had already jumped. There was no going back. She carefully placed the stack of plates on her service trolley, the soft clink of porcelain on silver, the only sound in the dead quiet. The simple action was a rebellion, a declaration that she was more than the objects she carried. She straightened up and met his stare directly. "I said, sir," she replied, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "Trust is not in the word, sir. It is in the silence that follows it." She delivered the English translation flatly, knowing it was as inadequate as Peterson's. Then, before he could respond, she switched back to his dialect, her tone shifting, becoming more respectful, but also more confident. "It means that a man's true intention is not proven by what he says, but by his willingness to listen and understand what is not said. It is about shared context, not just shared vocabulary." A flicker of something astonishment, perhaps even respect, danced in Rossi's dark eyes. He took another step closer. He was a man of immense physical presence, and as he approached, Catherine felt an instinctual urge to shrink back, an old, conditioned response from her years with Vincent. She forced herself to stand her ground. The failed translator Peterson looked on with a mixture of disbelief and professional humiliation. That's an interpretation. But the grammatical structure," he began feebly. Rossi cut him off with a flick of his wrist, a gesture of such finality that Peterson physically flinched and fell silent. Rossi's eyes never left Catherine's. "Where did a girl like you learn to speak like my grandmother?" He asked the question, sharp, probing. He was no longer just a businessman. He was an inquisitor. He was asking about her origins, her history, her very identity. This was the dangerous ground. The truth was a minefield. I lived abroad for a time," she said, the partial truth feeling like a colossal lie. It was vague enough to be plausible, yet it told him nothing. Rossi's lips thinned. He was not a man who appreciated vagueness. Abroad, he repeated the word, dripping with skepticism. "You did not learn this in a school in Florence. This is the language of the hearth of the village square. Who were your people?" "My people," Catherine thought with a bitter pang. "My people were a cage." She couldn't mention the Moretti family name. Vincent Moretti's family was a smaller but intensely proud and notoriously litigious rival to the Rossi Empire. Their feud was one of whispers and backroom dealings, a decades-long war of attrition in the New York textile scene. To connect herself to them would be catastrophic. "My past is not important, sir," she said, her voice dropping a hint of the old fear creeping in. "What is important is your deal." She deliberately used the phrase again, pulling his attention back to the business at hand away from her. Mr. Peterson is not wrong about the words, but he is missing the poetry. You are not just selling fabric. You are selling a story, a promise, that every piece of cloth is an extension of your family's honor. It's not a blood pact like a crime syndicate. It's a covenant, like a promise to God between your ancestors and the craft itself. That is what you need to make them understand. As she spoke, she saw the understanding dawn, not on Rossi's face, he already knew what he meant, but on the faces of the American executives. Richard Sterling's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, a glimmer of the true value, the intangible brand power Rossi was offering, seemed to penetrate his corporate mindset. Rossi studied her for a long moment, his gaze intense and analytical. He was weighing her, judging her. Then he made a decision. He turned to the utterly bewildered David Finch. "This dinner is not over," he announced. To Peterson, he was more dismissive. "You are finished. Send your bill to my office." He then pointed a resolute finger at Catherine. You are not a waitress anymore. Not for tonight. You work for me. Sit." He gestured to the chair Peterson had just vacated next to the American executives. It was an order, not an invitation. The entire room seemed to tilt on its axis. Catherine stared at the empty chair, its plush velvet upholstery, a symbol of a world she did not belong in. "Sit at the table. With these men." The idea was ludicrous, terrifying. "Sir, I can't," she stammered. "I'm an employee of the restaurant." "I have my duties." "Your duties just changed," Rossi said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned his powerful gaze on David Finch, who looked as if he might faint. "Mr. Finch, your employee is on loan to me for the remainder of the evening. I will compensate you for her time and your troubles. Handsomely. Do we have an understanding?" David, caught between the wrath of a millionaire and the complete shattering of restaurant protocol, could only manage a series of spastic nods. "Yes, Mr. Rossi." "Of course, Mr. Rossi. Whatever you need." Rossi turned back to Catherine. The command in his eyes was absolute. "Sit down. We have work to do." Her mind was a whirlwind of panic and exhilaration. This was insane. She was a waitress. She had bills to pay, a life to rebuild brick by painful brick. This man was offering her a seat at a table where billions were being discussed, all because of a language she had learned under duress. The irony was staggering. The very skill that had been a marker of her submission was now being presented as a source of power. Slowly, as if in a dream, she walked around the table. She could feel the stares of the executives, their curiosity mingled with suspicion. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? One of Rossi's younger associates, a sharp-featured man named Marco, watched her with a particularly penetrating gaze, his expression unreadable. She pulled out the heavy chair and sat down. The starched apron felt ridiculous, a stark reminder of her place. She instinctively began to untie it, her hands fumbling with the knot at her back. "Leave it," Rossi commanded from the head of the table as he retook his own seat. "Let them not forget where I found the only person in this city who could speak the truth." Catherine's hands fell to her lap. She sat there in her waitress uniform and her apron at a table laden with crystal and silver, the fate of a global business deal suddenly impossibly resting on her shoulders. The whisper of a forgotten tongue had become a roar, and it had just thrown her into the heart of the storm. Seated at the table, Catherine felt a dizzying sense of dislocation. The plush velvet of the chair was an alien landscape compared to the worn soles of her work shoes. The perspective was all wrong. She was used to looking down at the table, anticipating needs, clearing away remnants. Now she was at eye level, a participant. The heavy silverware felt like foreign implements in her hands, though she had polished and set thousands of them. Mr. Rossi let the silence settle again, a deliberate theatrical pause. He wanted everyone to absorb the shift in power, the sheer strangeness of the situation. He picked up his wine glass, swirled the deep red liquid, and then gestured toward Catherine with it. Now he began turning to Richard Sterling. "We will start again." And she, his gaze fixed on Catherine, will build the bridge. Sterling, a man accustomed to the predictable rhythms of corporate boardrooms, was clearly off balance. He looked at Catherine, then back at Rossi. "Mr. Rossi, with all due respect, this is highly unorthodox. We don't know anything about this young woman. We have no idea about her qualifications, her confidentiality." "Her qualification," Rossi interrupted, his voice like rolling thunder, "is that she understands. Do you have anyone on your 7-figure payroll who can claim the same no? Then she is qualified." He then looked at Catherine. "My apologies," he said, a surprising and disarming moment of courtesy. "I do not know your name. It's Catherine, sir. Catherine Miller." "Catherine," he repeated, testing the name. He nodded. "Catherine, explain to Mr. Sterling what I meant about the thread's memory." All eyes turned back to her. This was her test, her audition. She took a deep breath, pushing down the tremor that threatened to betray her fear. She turned to Sterling, forcing herself to make direct eye contact. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice clearer now, more assured. "What Mr. Rossi is trying to convey is a concept of legacy. When he says the thread has a memory, he means that every inch of fabric his mills produce is imbued with the skill, the struggles, and the reputation of his family. It remembers the drought that nearly ruined his great-grandfather's first harvest of flax. It remembers the innovation his grandfather introduced to the dyeing process. It remembers the decision Mr. Rossi's own father made to refuse a lucrative buyout during a recession, choosing integrity over easy money." She paused, letting the words sink in. She was no longer just translating, she was storytelling. She was weaving a narrative. When you buy his fabric, you are not just buying a commodity. You are buying that memory, that story. His concern is that by signing an exclusive deal with a massive conglomerate, that memory will be erased. He fears the story will be replaced by a SKU number and a profit margin report. He needs to know that you will be a guardian of that legacy, not just a purchaser of his product. As she finished, a new kind of silence fell over the room. It was not the tense, uncomfortable silence from before, but a thoughtful, contemplative one. Richard Sterling stared at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then a slow nod. A genuine understanding was finally dawning. "A guardian of the legacy," Sterling repeated softly. "I see." He looked at Rossi. "Mr. Rossi, I understand your concern. Our marketing for this new premier line would be built entirely around that story. The authenticity of the Rossi name is its primary asset. We don't want to erase it. We want to sell it." Rossi grunted a sound that could mean anything. He fired off a complex question in his dialect directed at Catherine, but intended for Sterling. It was a rapid-fire query about quality control oversight and the potential for dilution of the brand if production were to be scaled up. Catherine listened intently, her mind working furiously. This was more than just language now. It was business logistics and strategy. She turned back to Sterling. "Mr. Rossi asks how you can guarantee that the Rossi memory won't be compromised when your production schedule demands a 50% increase in output in the first year. He wants to know who in your organization will have the authority to halt a shipment if it does not meet his family's historical standards, standards that are often subjective and cannot be quantified on a checklist. Who will be the guardian when he is not in the room?" This was the crux of the issue. Sterling and his team exchanged a quick, worried glance. Their model was based on efficiency and scale. Rossi's was based on an almost fanatical devotion to perfection. The negotiations resumed, but the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Catherine was no longer a passive translator, but an active conduit. She didn't just swap words from one language to another. She filtered intentions, clarified cultural nuances, and softened abrasive edges. When Rossi made a demand that sounded like a blunt threat, she reframed it as a statement of his unshakable principles. When Sterling used corporate jargon that sounded sterile and disrespectful, she infused it with the language of partnership and respect that Rossi would understand. She was building the bridge just as he'd asked, plank by plank, word by word. One of Rossi's younger associates, the one called Marco, who had been watching her so intently, began to interject, speaking in a more formal, standardized version of the language. He raised points about legal clauses and liability. He was sharp, intelligent, and clearly a key player in the Rossi operation. Each time he spoke, he would look at Catherine, a subtle challenge in his eyes, as if testing the limits of her knowledge. At one point, he used a slightly archaic legal term related to artisan guilds. It was an obscure reference designed to trap her. Without missing a beat, Catherine explained its historical context to the Americans, relating it to the modern concept of intellectual property rights for a heritage brand. Marco's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a concession from one expert to another. From that moment on, his suspicion seemed to temper with a grudging respect. For 2 hours, Catherine navigated the treacherous waters of the negotiation. Her apron was a surreal touch in the high-stakes corporate drama. She forgot her exhaustion, her aching feet, the fear of her past. She was consumed by the task, by the intricate puzzle of language and meaning. She felt a surge of power, a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She wasn't Vincent Moretti's timid wife, forced to perform her linguistic skills to impress his overbearing relatives. She was Catherine Miller, the indispensable key to a billion-dollar deal. Finally, Rossi held up a hand. The conversation stopped. He and Sterling looked at each other across the long table. The tension was gone, replaced by the weary but solid foundation of a mutual understanding. Richard Rossi said, using Sterling's first name for the first time, "We will have our lawyers draft a preliminary agreement. It will include the creation of a new joint oversight committee for quality assurance. The committee will be chaired by my nephew, Marco." He gestured to the sharp-eyed young man. "And its decisions will be final, non-negotiable." Sterling broke into a wide, relieved smile. He stood up and extended his hand. "Valeriano, I think this is the beginning of a very profitable partnership." Rossi stood and shook his hand firmly. The deal was saved. As the executives began to pack their briefcases, buzzing with renewed energy, Rossi turned his attention back to Catherine. The room had once again faded into the background for him. There was only her. "You did well," he said. It was not effusive praise, but coming from him it felt like a coronation. David Finch, who had been hovering by the door looking progressively more astounded, hurried over. "Mr. Rossi, I'm so glad everything worked out. The restaurant is honored to have been of service." Rossi ignored him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, leather-bound checkbook and a fountain pen. He scribbled in it for a moment, tore out the check, and folded it. He held it out to Catherine. "For building the bridge," he said. Catherine looked at the folded piece of paper in his hand. Her first instinct, born of years of service industry training, was to refuse. It felt like a tip, and what she had done felt like so much more than that. But the look in his eyes told her it was not a tip. It was payment. It was acknowledgement. She reached out and took it, her fingers brushing his. The paper felt heavy, important. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "Do not thank me," he said. "You earned it. Now I have a car waiting. Marco will take my associates back to their hotel. I wish to speak with you. Privately." The relief and exhilaration that had buoyed her for the last 2 hours evaporated, replaced by a sudden cold dread. The business was done. The negotiation was over. Now it seemed the interrogation was about to begin. The ride in Valeriano Rossi's car was like entering another dimension. The gilded scepter, with its calculated opulence, was one thing. This was another. The vehicle, a custom-made sedan that whispered rather than drove through the streets of New York, was a cocoon of black leather and polished burr walnut. The city's chaotic symphony of sirens and horns was reduced to a distant, muted hum. It was the kind of silence Catherine had once dreamed of, but right now it felt suffocating. Rossi sat opposite her, not beside her, in the spacious rear cabin. The city lights slid across the planes of his face, making him look even more like a marble sculpture come to life. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the restaurant. He simply watched her, his gaze unwavering and unnervingly perceptive. Catherine clutched her purse in her lap. Inside it was the folded check. She hadn't dared to look at it yet. The sheer weight of it in her bag felt like a brand marking her. She was no longer just Catherine Miller, waitress. She was now a woman who had accepted money from Valeriano Rossi, and she had a chilling feeling that the transaction was far from complete. Finally, as the car glided through a dimly lit stretch of Central Park South, he spoke. "You are afraid of me," he stated. Oh, it wasn't a question. Catherine's gaze darted from the window to his face. "I respect you, Mr. Rossi. That is a politician's answer." He countered, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You were not a politician at my table. You were a warrior. You fought with words. Now you hide behind them." Why she didn't know how to respond. The truth was a venomous snake she kept coiled in a box deep inside her. Letting it out could poison everything. "I'm just a waitress, sir. Tonight was unusual." Unusual, he mused, leaning back into the supple leather. A waitress in a restaurant happens to be fluent in a specific provincial dialect that is fading even in its homeland. She understands not just the language, but the intricate cultural codes of my business. She has the courage to speak up to a man like me in a room full of powerful men. "No, Catherine, you are many things. Just a waitress is not one of them." He leaned forward slightly, his intensity pinning her in place. "So I ask again, who are you?" Her heart hammered. This was the moment she had been dreading. Her carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling before her eyes. "I told you my name is Catherine Miller. A name is a label. I am asking for the story," he pressed. "This fluency, it was not acquired on a vacation. This is deep knowledge, the kind one gets from family, from a husband." The word hung in the air between them. Husband. The sound of it made her feel nauseous. Vincent's handsome face, so often twisted by a cold, condescending rage, flashed in her mind. She could almost smell his cologne, feel the proprietary grip of his hand on her arm. She looked down at her own hands clasped tightly in her lap. She could see the faint, silvery trace of a scar on her ring finger where her wedding band used to be. She'd had to sell it to pay her first month's rent on her tiny apartment after she'd left. "I was married once," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It was a long time ago. To one of my countrymen," Rossi surmised. She simply nodded, unable to speak the words. To confirm it would invite more questions. Which family? From what city? Every answer would lead him closer to the Morettis, and she could not let that happen. The feud between the Rossi and Moretti families was quiet, but vicious. They were competitors in the high-end textile import business, constantly trying to poach clients and undercut one another. For Rossi to discover he had harbored Vincent Moretti's ex-wife used her to his advantage. She couldn't predict the fallout, but she knew it would be explosive. For all she knew, he might see her as a spy. The car slowed and pulled to a stop. Catherine looked out the window and was surprised to see they were not outside an office building or a grand townhouse, but a small, unassuming coffee shop in Greenwich Village. It was closed, the lights off inside. "I have kept you from your work," Rossi said, his tone softening slightly. "And I have put you in a difficult position. The least I can do is offer you a proper cup of coffee. My driver has a key." Before she could protest, the driver, a large, silent man, was opening her door. Rossi was already out of the car, standing on the pavement, waiting. Feeling as if she were being pulled along by an irresistible tide, Catherine followed him. The driver unlocked the door to the darkened cafe, flipped on a single low light over the counter, and then retreated back to the car, leaving them completely alone. The cafe was charming, filled with the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. Rossi went behind the counter with a surprising familiarity, taking 2 ceramic mugs from a shelf and operating the large, complex espresso machine like a seasoned barista. "My one indulgence that is not business," he said, his back to her as the machine hissed to life. "I bought this place for my daughter before she decided she wanted a different life." A note of profound sadness entered his voice, a crack in the granite facade. It was a brief, unguarded moment that humanized him more than anything else had all evening. He brought the 2 steaming mugs of cappuccino to a small table and gestured for her to sit. The gesture was warmer now, less of a command. "Catherine," he said, his eyes serious over the rim of his mug, "I will not press you for your story, not tonight. A woman who builds a fortress around her past usually has a very good reason for doing so, but I am not a fool. Your talent is extraordinary. To have someone like you clearing plates is a crime against nature." He set his mug down. "The check I gave you, it is for $50,000. Catherine gasped. The coffee mug in her hands trembled, and she quickly set it down before she spilled it. $50,000. That was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It was enough to pay off her student loans, to help her sister with tuition, to breathe. For the first time in 2 years, she could actually breathe. I can't accept that," she stammered. The amount was too staggering. "You already have," he said simply, "and it is merely a retainer. I want you to work for me. Not as a translator. Peterson can do that. I want you as an advisor, a cultural liaison. My company is expanding its operations in North America. I need someone at my side who understands both worlds, someone who can build bridges as you did tonight." He named a salary that made the $50,000 check seem like pocket change. It was a life-altering number. A number that promised not just security, but freedom. The freedom to never again worry about rent, to quit her second job, to finish her degree without drowning in debt. The freedom to be someone else. It was everything she had ever wanted, and it was a gilded cage more beautiful and far more dangerous than the one she had escaped. To accept would mean stepping into Rossi's world, a world of power, of wealth, of men like Vincent, a world where her past was not a distant memory, but a present and constant danger. "I would need you to travel with me." Rossi continued outlining the job. To board meetings in Chicago, to negotiations in Los Angeles. You would be my voice, my ears. As he spoke, Catherine's mind raced. What were the odds? In a city of 8 million people, what were the odds she would run into Vincent or his family? Slim, perhaps. But in the rarefied world that Rossi inhabited, a world of exclusive restaurants, private clubs, and charity galas, the odds shrank dramatically. Sooner or later, she would be in the same room as her past. "Sir, I am deeply honored." She began choosing her words carefully. "But I am not qualified. I have no business degree, no corporate experience. You have a PhD. In understanding people," he countered. "That is more valuable than any MBA. I am not offering you a job, Catherine. I am offering you a lifeline. I see a woman who is hiding her light under a bushel. I am giving you the chance to let it shine." His words, meant to be inspiring, sent a shiver of fear through her. The last thing she wanted was to shine. She wanted to remain in the shadows, safe and unseen. She looked at the check again in her mind's eye. $50,000. It was the price he was paying for her services tonight. But she knew with a sinking certainty that it was also the first payment on the price of her past. A past that was no longer buried but had just been appraised at a very high value. And Valeriano Rossi was a man who expected to get what he paid for. The days that followed the dinner at the Gilded Scepter felt surreal, as if Catherine were living in a dream someone else was having. She deposited the check, an act that made her hands shake so much she could barely sign her name on the back. The bank teller looked at the amount, then at her simple coat and worn purse with open suspicion, until the check cleared instantly, a testament to the power of the Rossi name. The numbers appearing in her bank account balance didn't feel real. They were an abstraction, a string of zeros that promised a future she was too terrified to claim. She had given David Finch her 2 weeks' notice, an act that felt both liberating and terrifying. David, who had been a nervous wreck since that night, treated her with a strange new deference, as if she were a visiting royal who had briefly condescended to clear tables. Her co-workers buzzed with rumors. Some were happy for her, others were venomously jealous. To them, she was the girl who had won the lottery. None of them knew the ticket was a time bomb. She had not given Mr. Rossi a final answer. She had asked for a week to consider his offer, a request he had granted with a simple nod, as if he were certain of her eventual reply. The salary he had offered was a constant, tantalizing whisper in her mind. It wasn't just money. It was a weapon, a shield. It was the power to be truly independent, to protect her younger sister Jessica from the financial struggles she herself had known. Jessica was in her sophomore year at a state university, and the thought of being able to tell her she never had to worry about student loans again was a powerful lure. To wrestle with the decision, she spent an afternoon at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, her sanctuary. She found herself in the gallery of Renaissance paintings, surrounded by portraits of stern-faced men and their bejeweled wives. The women in the paintings stared out with placid, controlled expressions. They were dressed in the finest fabrics, the velvets and silks of their day, likely sourced from mills not so different from Rossi's. They were symbols of their husbands' wealth and status. They were beautiful, revered, and trapped. Gilded cages. A wave of dizziness washed over her as she looked at one portrait in particular, a woman with dark, knowing eyes and a single perfect pearl earring. She saw her own reflection in the protective glass, and for a terrifying second, it felt like looking at a ghost of her future, or a ghost of her past. She remembered a dinner party early in her marriage to Vincent. It was at his parents' sprawling estate on Long Island. The house was cold, filled with heavy, dark furniture and the weight of tradition. She had been wearing a new dress, a gift from Vincent, made of a heavy silk that rustled when she moved. She had spent weeks practicing her language skills, desperate to impress his formidable mother, Sophia Moretti. During dinner, the conversation turned to a recent business rivalry. Vincent's father was railing against a competitor who had outmaneuvered him on a contract for imported lace. The name he spat out with such venom was Valeriano Rossi. That old wolf Vincent's father had snarled. He preaches tradition and honor, but he is a shark. He uses the old ways as a weapon, charming his suppliers with stories of his grandfather, while his lawyers gut you in the fine print. Sophia Moretti had added her voice like ice chips. His ambition is vulgar. A man of true family does not need to be so aggressive. He has no breeding. Catherine had listened in silence, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She was living in the heart of this feud, a bloodless war fought with contracts and whispers. Later that evening, she had made a minor social blunder, confusing two distant uncles. Vincent had been furious. He had pulled her into a library, his fingers digging into her arm. "You embarrassed me," he'd hissed, his voice low and menacing. "You are a Moretti now. You must be perfect. Your every word, every gesture reflects on me, on this family. Do you understand?" She had understood all too well. Her value was in her performance. Her fluency, her poise, her beauty, they were not hers. They were assets belonging to the Moretti family, to be deployed for their social and business advantage. The beautiful silk dress suddenly felt like a straitjacket. The house, a prison. That was her gilded cage. Standing in the museum now, the memory was so vivid she could almost feel Vincent's grip on her arm. Rossi's offer was another cage, wasn't it? A different design, perhaps a more benevolent keeper, but a cage nonetheless. She would be his asset. Her voice, her mind, her unique understanding, they would belong to him. She would once again be performing a role, this time on a global stage. And on that stage, the chances of encountering the Moretti family were not just possible, they were inevitable. What would Vincent do if he saw her? If he saw her at Rossi's side, empowered, successful, wielding the very skills he had once used to control her. His pride was a fragile, violent thing. He would not see her success as her own. He would see it as a betrayal, a theft. He would believe she had taken a Moretti asset, her knowledge of their culture and language, and sold it to the enemy. He would try to destroy her. He would try to destroy Rossi for harboring her. She left the museum, her mind in turmoil. Walking through the crisp autumn air of Central Park, she wrestled with her fear. For 2 years, she had been defined by her escape. Her entire identity was built on what she had run from. She had survived by being small, quiet, and invisible. Rossi's offer was terrifying because it asked her to be the opposite. It asked her to be visible, to be powerful, to have a voice. Could she do it? Did she even remember how her phone buzzed? It was an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, "Catherine Miller." The voice was male, professional, and familiar. It took her a moment to place it. "This is Marco," he said. "Mr. Rossi's nephew." Catherine's stomach clenched. Marco, the sharp-eyed associate from the dinner, the one who had watched her with such unnerving intensity. "Yes," she said, her tone cautious. "My uncle is a man of great vision, but sometimes his instincts overlook practical complications," Marco said, his English precise and unaccented. "He asked me to arrange the paperwork for your employment. A background check is standard procedure for a role at this level." A background check. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. It was over. They would find her previous name, Catherine Moretti. The marriage records. The connection would be made instantly. She had been a fool to think she could hide it. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. "The thing is," Marco continued, and there was a strange, almost conspiratorial note in his voice, "I am very good at my job. Very thorough. I already know what the background check will find. And I think for the sake of everyone involved, you and I should have a conversation before my uncle sees the official report. For his protection, and for yours." Marco Rossi's sharp-eyed nephew arranged a discreet meeting at a bookstore cafe, a neutral ground for secrets. He placed a thin manila folder on the table between them. "A background check is standard procedure for a role at this level," he began, his voice low. "And I am very thorough." With unnerving precision, he laid her hidden life, bare Catherine Moretti, married for 5 years, to Vincent Moretti, son of their family's most hated rival. He knew about the messy, sealed divorce and her subsequent 2 years of carefully constructed anonymity. He quickly clarified this wasn't blackmail, but a warning. He detailed the decades-long blood feud between the Rossi and Moretti families, a bitter rivalry steeped in accusations of betrayal. "You must understand who Vincent is." Marco explained, his gaze intense. "He's a man of immense pride and very little impulse control. When he sees you at my uncle's side, he won't see an ex-wife who found success. He will see a traitor who has delivered a family asset, your knowledge, to the enemy. He will retaliate, and his goal will be to ruin you both." Marco admitted his own dilemma. Catherine had invigorated his uncle in a way he hadn't seen in years, yet she was a catastrophic liability. He presented her with a stark choice. "Option 1, you walk away now," he said. "The $50,000 is yours. Disappear again, and I will bury this report forever. Option 2, you accept the job. But if you do, you must tell my uncle everything before he finds out from someone else. Deceit is the one thing he will not forgive. Hiding this guarantees disaster." The offer to run to return to the safety of her invisible life was a powerful lure. But Catherine thought of the voice she had rediscovered at that dinner table, the feeling of her own power. To willingly silence it again felt like a surrender she could no longer make. A new resolve settled over her. She was done being defined by her fear of Vincent. "All right," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that surprised even herself. "Book me a meeting with your uncle. I'll tell him myself. A look of admiration crossed Marco's face. He slid the folder toward her. I thought you might say that. You'll need this. Know what our enemy knows about you. Valeriano Rossi's office was a top-floor fortress from which he surveyed his kingdom. Catherine entered Marco, already standing by the window in silent support. She placed the folder detailing her past on Rossi's enormous desk. Before I accept your offer, she began, her voice unwavering. You need to know the truth. She laid her past bare, her marriage to Vincent Moretti, the suffocating control of his family, and the bitter feud between their name and Rossi's. She explained that her fluency was a tool for survival, not passion, and that hiring her would invite retaliation from his greatest rivals. She braced for dismissal. Instead of anger, Rossi met her confession with a surprising story of his own late wife, who had also faced family betrayal. He saw a warrior in Catherine, just as he had in his wife. You think your past is a liability. Rossi stated, his voice resonating with new energy. I see it as a weapon. You have intimate knowledge of my enemy. He rose and came around the desk to stand before her. I am not retracting my offer. I am changing it. I don't just want an advisor. I want a strategist. Your past is not a chain. It is a sword, and I will teach you how to wield it. Tears of profound relief streamed down Catherine's face. He wasn't just offering a job. He was offering an alliance. For the first time, she felt free. I accept, she said. When she shook his outstretched hand, it wasn't just a deal. It was the beginning of a war, and she was finally armed for battle. Catherine's story isn't just about a hidden talent saving the day. It's about reclaiming your own narrative. She took the very language that was used to cage her and transformed it into the key to her freedom and her power. Her journey reminds us that the most difficult parts of our past can often become the source of our greatest strengths. We all have hidden skills, buried histories, and quiet voices inside of us, waiting for the right moment to speak up. What part of your own story have you been hiding that might just be your most powerful asset? If this story of courage and transformation resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who might need to hear that their past does not have to define their future. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories that inspire and empower. Comment below and tell us about a time you surprised yourself with your own hidden strength. We can't wait to hear your story.